And now, it's Boomer Life. Lifestyle discussion designed to make your life more engaging, meaningful, and complete. Celebrating the baby boomer generation, this is Boomer Life on CISL 650.
One of the world's most famous money songs, a little Pink Floyd music to start off this episode of Boomer Life here on CISL 650. And on the program today, with money in mind, we're talking about solutions to debt problems. The discussion will give you every reason to believe there's hope and there is freedom after debt. Doesn't feel like it at the moment, I'm sure, in some cases. But if you're feeling like you're on an island of financial trouble, if you have excessive debt, you don't have to feel overwhelmed or isolated. There are solutions. Joining us in studio today is Brett Luckin. Brett is with Abakhan and Associates, trustees in bankruptcy here in Vancouver. He's been with the firm since 2009 and is proving, well, it says right here on the official corporate pamphlet, Brett, so it must be true. You are proving to be a valuable asset in the areas of corporate bankruptcy, receivership, proposals, and you come to us from South Africa after 14 years of experience down there in advertising and publishing. Welcome back. It's good to see you again.
Thanks very much, Stirling. Thank you.
So you, since 2009, have been a member of the firm at Abakhan and Associates, trustees in bankruptcy. Are you a trustee yourself?
I am qualified actually just over a year and a bit ago.
Okay.
Yes.
What is involved, Brett, with becoming a trustee? It's a national designation, and
It is.
are only a few hundred of you serving 32 million of us.
Just over 1,000 actually, I think.
Okay.
Just short of or just over 1,000 trustees Canada-wide.
It makes it a fairly highly specialized occupation then.
It is. It's the actual physical designation is called a CIRP, which is Chartered Insolvency Restructuring Professional, and it takes arguably somewhere between 3 to 5 years because mostly the people that do it are already gainfully employed and obviously have jobs and mortgages to pay themselves.
And you just can't walk away and go to school for a couple of years.
You can't just go to school.
That's right. Life goes on.
Exactly. So it takes a few years. It's fairly intense from a study point of view, an obscene amount of content that you have to remember.
Mm-hmm.
But moreover, other than that, even though you get your designation, in order to become qualified, you have to go through an oral board process where you sit in front of a bunch of people who probably don't appear to be friendly. And you're asked a whole bunch of questions and scenarios and how to apply the law, how to apply what you've learnt over the preceding years. And if they believe you are able to do what they think you can do, then you get your designation.
You're granted your designation.
You're granted your trustee in bankruptcy.
Interesting. Yeah. Now tell us about Abakhan and Associates, Brett. You've joined them in 2009, and at the time you weren't a trustee. You began the process shortly after coming to the firm. So how did that work out back in 2009?
Back in 2009, what actually happened is, having immigrated to Canada in 2008, I actually had no idea what I was going to do here. I came here with my family and wandered around for 2.5 months in an RV and trying to figure out actually even what town to stay in, what city to stay in BC. Eventually decided to settle in Vancouver and went through probably around 7 or 8 months of just sort of wandering around trying to figure out what to do, maybe buying a business, maybe getting a job, who knew, right? And for various reasons, there were people who believed that I had a potential in the insolvency and restructuring industry. And they referred me, ultimately I got referred to George Abakhan of Abakhan and Associates. Right. And he granted me a job in Feb 2009, in fact. And as soon as I got into it, it was very clear to me that it was something I wanted to do. Right. I was very interested in the way that it worked and the kind of things that you needed to be able to understand, know, and apply. And I immediately started my designation study.
To become a trustee. But your background is from South Africa. Is a trustee in bankruptcy, Brett, a Canadian thing? Or do they have trustees in bankruptcy in most Commonwealth countries around the world?
I can only speak for the countries I know of. Practically speaking, I mean, there is bankruptcy. In and of itself, bankruptcy exists throughout the world.
Of course.
But from a trustee in bankruptcy, it tends to be strongly a Canadian thing. In South Africa, as an example, in the US, it's very strongly lawyer-driven. It's run by lawyers. The processes are very different. I think in terms of the way that Canada deals with insolvency issues, maybe a little bit more advanced than some of the other countries. Certainly far more user-friendly, I think, is probably the word I could use.
Interesting stuff. So most trustees in Canada then, Brett, are likely not to be lawyers in terms of their professional training. They're more likely to be from the accounting profession, the numbers background.
Correct. CGA, CMA, CAs, that tends to be a large portion of trustees come from that. Yes, from that background.
And unfortunately, we're learning some numbers. Did a little homework here, and these numbers are rather disturbing. More than 120,000 Canadians declare personal bankruptcy or file a consumer proposal each year. And the largest percentage of people experiencing those kinds of serious financial issues live right here in British Columbia, don't they?
Yeah, in British Columbia, we have a fairly static amount of around 12,000 people that declare some kind of formal insolvency proceeding.
That's 10% of the national average, which is higher than our share of the population.
Well, there are, not to point anything out, but Quebec and Ontario do their fair share of work there too.
I'm sure.
Yeah, but in BC, we have around 12,000 people, and it's a challenge because in just bankruptcy, just the whole being insolvent as a human being is something that is really challenging for people to deal with.
Well, there's nothing worse, I think, than coming to terms with just watching the numbers not match up. I mean, for the first little while, oh gosh, well, yeah, better start paying a few more bills on time, that kind of thing. And then you just realize doing the math month after month after month, there just isn't enough money month after month to address all of those obligations. Thus begins the slippery slope, right?
You know what? I think actually part of the problem is that people don't do the sums month after month. And very often the problems only really start when often it's too late. People don't do budgets. My experience is that many of the people I deal with.
So I'm giving us too much credit here then.
Yeah, they don't do budgets. They don't control their expenditure relative to their income.
Right.
They take on debts that probably they should have thought about twice or even 3 times before doing them. Mm-hmm. They spend more on their credit card and don't really get that money. Ultimately, you're just borrowing future income to pay for something today.
Right.
So if you go out and you spend $300 on groceries, as an example, you're going to eat those groceries inside the next...
Long before they're paid for.
Long before they're paid for,
right.
Exactly. So the whole concept and the understanding of what credit is and what actually it means to use a credit card or a line of credit or some kind of loan from the bank to buy an asset or a consumable that expires long before you've actually physically paid that debt off. Many people don't do those sums and then find themselves in positions where they are in a lot of trouble because they are now paying for something that long ago they don't have anymore.
Right, right. Now, I suppose this is all compounded. If we're not particularly vigilant, and it sounds like we're rather sloppy in that regard when it comes to just doing the monthly budget.
Yes.
How much money in, money out. It doesn't take that long, but again, sometimes it's a little too painful reality necessarily to go, oh my, there's not as much in the cupboard as one thought there was,
yes.
And it's going to look even more bleak next month. So who wants to visit that once a month, Brett? It's much more fun just going out and borrowing money and spending it.
Yes, you and I discussed this earlier when we were having coffee, but one of my personal feeling, I have a very strong feeling that I find it bizarre that an incredibly important life skill, which is effectively the ability to handle money, financial management, just the control of money in and out, which is something that everybody has to do on almost a daily basis,
sure,
is not a life skill that's actually taught in any formal way.
Mm-hmm.
Schools don't teach it. You don't have classes where people can just go to, and I think that's wrong. And in the credit culture that we live in, it's madness that we don't spend time teaching people how to do that sort of thing.
And we don't. And not to point too many fingers, but we just flat out don't teach young Canadians about money. And as a result, we have achieved a rather stunning level of financial illiteracy.
Yes.
And that's not helping, especially young people who are getting into, some pretty serious problems. And I think one of the problems, and you and I have touched on this in the past, Brett, is cheap money. The governments and the financial central banks of the world have decided in the wake of the '08 financial crisis to artificially stimulate economies. And one of the reasons is because they want us to spend ourselves back to better financial health. And so they've kept interest rates ridiculously, historically low. Money is dirt cheap. If you can get your hands on money, there's plenty of it, and it costs almost nothing.
And it's very easy to get your hands on it. That's the thing. As I think I may have mentioned this before to you, where I have people coming in who are filing bankruptcy or filing a consumer proposal, and even the week prior or days prior to them coming to see me, they get a credit card in the mail offering $5,000.
Right.
So I don't know what sort of due diligence has been done behind that process, but I don't understand how easily money is just handed out to people.
Well, and here we are just a few weeks back into the school year, however belatedly, but think of all of those 18-year-olds going off to college and university this year, and they get their welcome to this Institute of Higher Learning package, and it's got all their instructions and who their classes are going to be with and what building the classrooms are, et cetera, and there's a credit card application, or maybe just a blank credit card, fill in the name and the numbers, and off you go. And free money? Kiss me again, says the 18-year-old. Thank you very much. And by the way, where do I sign up to start racking up my student loan? You know, that connecting those two dots even isn't on the front page.
No, you've just pointed out something which I always find quite interesting, is that you often see. With due respect, of course, banks are entitled, like anybody else, to get business and to, increase their client base. But just handing out credit cards for free to people who actually, at that point in time, don't yet even have a job.
Right.
Don't even have the ability to pay that credit card off. And of course, that ties in, I suppose, in a strong way to many of your listeners, because very often the banks will want mom and dad to co-sign on that debt, to do some kind of co-guarantor. And of course, if the son or the daughter doesn't get the job that everyone was hoping they were going to get,
guess who's on the hook for the loan?
Mom and dad are on the hook for that.
So we'll talk more about that and safeguards. We don't have to turn into meanies, but we are allowed to be reasonable adults. And if an arrangement for a loan to a nephew, a grandchild, or a son or daughter is in the cards, it can still be done in an adult fashion. And we'll discuss some of those details. But you've mentioned the core two points of this conversation. And when we speak with someone from Abakhan and Associates, we're obviously going to talk about bankruptcies and consumer proposals.
Correct.
So now, if 120,000 Canadians declare personal bankruptcy, Brett, or file a consumer proposal every year, what's the percentage of bankruptcies versus consumer proposals? And I suppose even before that, what's the difference between a bankruptcy and a consumer proposal?
They're very different processes, although they're strongly linked with each other in that one technically actually cannot exist without the other.
Okay.
If I were to simplify it down, really the job of a trustee in bankruptcy, when you want to file a consumer proposal, and a consumer proposal, to be clear, is you are agreeing to repay your debt. But you are agreeing to repay your debt probably at a much lower percentage than 100 cents on the dollar.
Okay.
So that's really what you're doing.
So it's a commitment to repay.
But you're compromising. You're saying, I can't repay 100 cents on the dollar. Potentially you can only afford 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 cents on the dollar.
Sure.
Your creditors will say yes to your proposal, because the job of the trustee is to figure out, if they say no, then your only other practical alternative is a bankruptcy.
Which is a total loss for your creditors.
And your creditors very well may get far less. So the trustee actually sits down and does a calculation. That's the job of the trustee, to sit down and do a calculation that in a bankruptcy, if the creditors will get, let's say, 10 cents on the dollar or 15 cents on the dollar return, will the proposal offer significantly more, and therefore is an incentive for your creditors to say yes.
Right. Okay. So this a consumer proposal, therefore, is a commitment to repay the debts to one extent or another, that to be determined by the trustee and the creditors.
Correct.
The bankruptcy, on the other hand, is literally hitting the wall nose first, right?
In a bankruptcy, the way that a bankruptcy works is your creditors will get a return out of you through two means. Either the assets that you own, subject to certain exemptions, because there's things you're allowed to keep. An obvious thing would be in BC, $4,000 worth of household furniture. There's exemptions on motor cars and on houses.
Well, I was just going to say, you'd want to be able to hang on to your
Yeah,
car
and
because
RRSPs.
You've got to still carry on and make a living.
Right, and so there's a return that potentially may come out of what assets you own the day you go bankrupt. And there's also a return for your creditors potentially through your income. There's a concept that's thrown around a lot called surplus income. But really what that is the federal government says that every single individual who goes bankrupt is allowed to keep a certain amount of money in their pocket every month,
right,
net income, to put food on their table and a roof over their head.
Sure.
And if you earn up to that level, you will not pay any surplus income. An example is right now, in 2014, completely coincidental, it's $2,014 for a single individual. So you can earn
you can make that per month.
$2,014 net income a month and pay nothing to your creditors in a bankruptcy.
Okay.
Okay, so what will happen is that your trustee in bankruptcy figures out that calculation and says, well, based on that, there's a percentage return to your creditors. So it actually doesn't matter how much you owe to your creditors if you go bankrupt. What's important is what you actually physically own and what you earn.
Okay.
And that'll define the return. But your consumer proposal is all about, can you afford to make a payment over a 5-year period which is substantively better than what the trustee figures your creditors will get in a bankruptcy.
Need to take a break, but just back to the numbers, Brett, for a quick second, of the consumer proposals versus bankruptcy that 120,000 of us go through every year. How does it shake out numbers-wise, one versus the other?
There's marginally more bankruptcies generally. Although Abakhan and Associates, we actually have, interesting enough, we have a 60%, 40% split, and only 60% proposals and 40% bankruptcies. But generally speaking, throughout Canada, there are slightly more bankruptcies than proposals.
Our guest in studio from Abakhan and Associates, Trustees in Bankruptcy, is Brett Luckin. This is Boomer Life on CISL 650, and we're back with lots more right after this.
Celebrating the baby boomer lifestyle. This is Boomer Life on CISL 650.